is what Parliament used to look like, but at the start of the pandemic, the House of Commons suspended all regular sittings, going from a full House to eventually a select few and creating a virtual special COVID-19 committee. But with the current agreement set to expire and provinces reopening, is it time for Parliament to do the same? Thursday, and I am here with At Issue ChantalBarrette, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. We had some technical difficulties with her tonight, so we will give her extra time to talk about her thoughts next week. Okay, I'll start with you, Chantal. The deadline for this current agreement to suspend the House is up on Monday. Do you, from what you're seeing with the virtual committee or this in-person committee once a week, do you think that we need more, that we need to go further and allow more of Parliament to resume in a more regular way?
Yes, more of Parliament. No return to normal, I don't think, is in the works. I think it would be interesting to have a hybrid formula that would see more people physically in the House, but also access for people who can't through screens. Whether that's going to happen on the same regular House of Commons schedule, possibly not realistic, having the whole House back as it was. I think there are lots of logistical issues traveling from further, west or east. Some MPs live in hotels. Not so sure that there are many hotels waiting to welcome them. Right. Go down the list, and then a lot of people who work on the Hill have kids who are still not in school or daycare.
Yeah, so all the logistical things aside, Andrew, does the conversation need to be different? Would it change anything in terms of the conversation between the opposition parties and the government at this stage?
Yes, it absolutely would. I mean, there's a reason why every legislative chamber in the world outside of a pandemic meets together in a single chamber with everyone present, because that's how you focus attention. That's how you hold ministers' feet to the fire, by exposing them to the glare of public scrutiny. So yes, there are particular logistical problems that Chantal has run down. It means we can't have 338 MPs, but we can certainly have more than we have had and more sittings than we have had. Maybe in this hybrid thing is something worth exploring. But the longer this goes on, and as other things start to open, the more one begins to suspect that the government's reticence on this has less to do with its concern for the safety and health of MPs and more to do with convenience, because it certainly gives the Prime Minister most of the public attention as he announces day after day new spending programs. But here we are with opposition MPs barely able to get a hearing, barely able to ask questions, certainly not in a format that anybody's going to pay much attention to, while the government's spending tens of billions of dollars, it seems like every week, and we still don't have an economic update or anything approaching a budget. So this has gone on long enough, it seems to me.
What would it? But what would it change in terms of the subject matter? Like today, for instance, there was a question about the Harrington Lake renovations, and the government said, "Well, we're not answering that. This is a COVID-19 committee." I'm not sure that in a question period or a regular sitting that they would have said anything different. That they would have said more. That they would have actually given a full answer. So what does it practically change? Do you think, Chantal and then Andrew? Chantal, then Andrew. Yeah.
I think everyone in every way is pining to go back to normal. I don't believe that even if you have the House of Commons meeting physically more than it is meeting, that suddenly it's going to change the dynamics between the government and the opposition parties. I also believe that at this juncture, it would be a misreading of public opinion to believe that Canadians are craving a return to more partisan politics. So if and when that does happen, the House comes back, and I agree that it should, the onus is going to be not only on the government to be accountable, but on the opposition parties to demonstrate that there is a reason to be there, that we will not go back to the day the World Health Organization declared a pandemic, and the official opposition was interested in every topic but that.
Yeah, that's true, that the onus is also on the opposition to make this work and to ask good questions. Andrew?
Well, there's always an onus on both sides to try to appear more reasonable than the other. So if the opposition misplays this, they will do so to their cost. So whether or not the public is hungering for a return to partisan politics, I mean, partisan politics is how we do democracy. It's how we do hold governments to account. It may not be pretty all the time. It may not look like a graduate seminar, but it's how the process works. So if and when the logistics and the health concerns allow, There is no substitute for those kind of in-person meetings. They can be supplemented by the virtual settings, but they have to be part of the mix. And to come back to your point, or your question, Rosemary, yeah, the government has been able to say, oh, you can only ask questions about the COVID pandemic. You're not going to ask us other questions about other matters. That's got to change as well. I mean, yes, the pandemic is the single most important issue facing the country, but there are other things that are also happening, and the opposition has a perfect right to be probing and asking about those questions. And again, so far as logistics allow, that's got to be, you know, part of the return to semi-normalcy. We're not going back to 338 MPs anytime soon, but we can certainly do something that's much more approximating Parliament as we know it and either love it or despise it.
Well, I would also suggest that the government opened the door to that, did they not, when they moved forward on those gun regulations and then put forward the other things that they were going to do in the future, but changing
That's
the regulations around military style or assault style weapons almost allowed the opposition to have an argument to say, well, you're doing other things too. Why can't we come out and have a conversation around that?
Of course,
yes,
exactly
but,
right.
Yeah, Chantal, go ahead.
But careful here that this doesn't, you know, increasingly sound like a conversation in the bubble and removed from reality. Partisan politics is one thing, but constructive debate is, I think, what many Canadians are looking for at this point. To start a conversation on the tone of the ads that I've been seeing on the social media, for instance, from the official opposition saying Justin Trudeau has failed you. I'm not sure that that will do very much either to get Canada forward or for the opposition parties or the Conservatives to look like a responsible alternative government.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. Go ahead, Andrew.
No disagreement there, but there's a difference between saying the Parliament's not functioning in the way that we would always desire, the opposition parties are not always behaving as we would wish they would. Same goes for the government, but that's not an argument, seems to me, for leaving Parliament effectively shuttered. It's not pretty, but it's the only Parliament we've got.
Well, and I would note that Alberta is returning to some form of sitting next Monday. So there are provincial legislatures that are doing things too. Go ahead,
it's a lot easier to get a provincial legislature working than one that has MPs from every region. And the argument that those regional voices need to be heard in Canada's Parliament still holds. No matter that you can get more bodies in from Ontario and Quebec, that's not the main issue. That being said, and for all that there is to be said about having Parliament, the fact is that we are a month away from what is usually the summer adjournment. So we're not talking here, I guess, about having Parliament sit through the summer. Certainly the logistical issues over that would be significant.
Yeah, there have been questions about it, but certainly no one seems keen on going down that road. Let me just ask you in a minute's time whether you think that the government is, outside of this conversation, being transparent enough with its actions and its decisions and how it's moving forward, Andrew.
No. And there's this particular matter of, and again, allowing for some of the difficulties in forecasting, but again, it's been several weeks now, many weeks. At some point, the government has got to start saying, what is the shape of the budget that we're facing? How much are they prepared to spend? What is their plan to try to get a handle on that, to try to eventually rein it in? We need to start seeing what their plan is. They've scrambled well. They've reacted to events in the moment. Everyone understands how tough it was in those first few weeks. But we're out of the emergency, crisis moment right now, and we're now getting into the longer term, and they have to start leveling with us.
Chantal.
I'm not as harsh on the government on transparency. I believe many things are still very much in flux. I'm not sure that we are so much out of the crisis as adjusting to it, and I am not convinced that with all the energies that the government has expended on managing the day-to-day uncertainties, that it is in a shape to come up with informed answers on that. And I'm not saying that that's because they don't want to give them. I believe that they don't have them. They need the time to work on them for those answers to be worth more than the paper they're written on or whatever shape they take.
Okay, this week there's also been a lot of talk around a second wave. There is, as Dr. Bonnie Henry says, no pandemic in history that doesn't have that second wave. Health officials say it's really a question of when. So how does a government prepare for this? Here's some of what the Prime Minister had to say about that this week.
One of the things we know is that in pandemics, there are usually second waves. The question that we're very much focused on is, as that second wave begins, or as we start to see resurgences in a reopened economy, how quickly are we able to contain them and control them? And that comes down to the scale of testing, the scale of contact tracing we're able to have right across the country.
So without making this a discussion around the public health policy that has to be in place, you can go there if you want, but the risk, I guess, of governments that they run now as we move towards a reopening, knowing that the chance that there will be a second wave and the possibility that it could be worse remains out there. And how do you manage that political risk, and how do you manage all the things that have to be in place in order to deal with that, Chantal?
I'm not sure you can manage the political risk of something that might happen that you can't prevent.
Yeah.
For one. Two, the onus and the ball is primarily, again, on this, in the court of the provinces who are responsible for the healthcare system. A major problem that I think a lot of people see down the road, nothing to do with increased testing and all of those issues, which are totally valid, is fatigue. Among frontline medical workers, be they nurses or long-term care workers, doctors. At some point, you need to have room for a breather if you're going to have a second wave, because what you are going to see is people just walking away from the battlefield out of sheer fatigue.
Yeah, I mean, we've already seen that in the first wave in your province, right? I mean, that has happened. Andrew, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the advantage we have is that this is the second wave after the first. The first wave caused such difficulties for us because we weren't prepared. When I say we, governments around the world, for the most part, with obvious exceptions that we've talked about, but particularly in this country, we didn't have the stockpiling of protective equipment. We didn't have the testing lined up. We were just not ready. This time, we can't say we weren't warned. This time, I mean, we couldn't say we weren't warned the first time, but we really can't say we weren't warned this time, having gone through it. So presumably we'll be better prepared. Presumably, if we do get the testing and tracing apparatus lined up ahead of time, we'll be able to jump on these cases much sooner and not be so overwhelmed. That being said, there's so much that's new and different about this virus and this pandemic. And one of the things that's new and different is we've never seen this kind of public policy response before. We've never seen this kind of mobilization of the public en masse and this kind of mass behavioral change. So we don't know exactly what will happen. We don't know exactly what the size or shape of the second wave will be, but we obviously have to be ready for the worst.
But I wonder if we do know that the scrutiny on the government in terms of response will be greater for exactly the reasons that you said. Now you've had some experience, you've had some time to prepare. So if you screw up on the second one, the patience by the public may not be there. Oh, Chantal doesn't like that. Let me go to Chantal first.
I really find that objectionable, because how do you prepare for the worst? Well,
I don't know.
In this unknown, well, the answer I don't know is also the answer that governments would give you. You can put precautions in place. You can ask people, and they are doing whatever they are being asked to do. But to say that there will be some magic that will operate over the next 6 to 8 weeks that will mean that if and when a second wave shows up, we are going to be bulletproof because there is no reason we shouldn't be, because we were warned. I don't buy that for a second.
No, I'm not suggesting that,
it's
but
too
I'm saying
complicated.
I agree with you. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm suggesting that maybe the questions to the government will be more pointed, because we will know, at least have a better idea of what we should have been doing, or the ways in which you prepare for something.
Okay,
I don't know.
And what is the should have been doing that we're going to so know that we should do?
I think the public was willing to cut not just the federal government, but also the provincial governments, and this isn't being laid at the feet of any one government here. I think the public was willing to cut people a fair bit of slack the first time around. even whether they should or not. I mean, some of the mistakes are just evident in hindsight. Some of the things are maybe more culpable. But now going into the second wave, you've got months ahead of time to prepare. You do have time to make sure we've got enough ventilators. You do have time to make sure we've got enough masks. You do have time to ramp up the testing and tracing apparatus. So I do think there are some measures that we now know we were deficient in the past, and we have time and the opportunity now to do what arguably we should have done before the first wave. So I do think it is fairer to start to really hold people to account if they don't manage it as well the second time around. I'm not sure I agree with Chantal at all on that.
I'm only arguing that all of these things that Andrew mentions are things that governments are getting them to do. But the notion that they will work a miracle that will avoid having to live through the past 2 months again in the fall or earlier or next winter, and that people should hold it against government having done all this, that no, it didn't quite work out. I don't think that really would advance anyone to say someone else would have given the same parameters and having been in the process of doing all these things. Because no one is saying, no government is saying we're not going to get more masks, more testing, we're not going to use this time to get ready. But there is no way that a government can be expected to have everything so well in place that we won't be back to March 15th in 3 months.
It depends what we mean by that. I don't think anybody's going to blame them for the existence of a second wave. I think what will matter is how do we deal with that second wave.
Okay, I got to leave it there. That was good. I sparked a good conversation there. Thank you both very much. We'll see you next week.